old, that's the reason. Okay, first of all, you probably don't know that this is the fourth time you've asked me to speak, all right?
First time I asked you.
Okay. The first time was in the 80s, when you first organized and you were at the old library. And I'd just gotten back from England, so you asked me about that. And I'm going to say a little bit about that now because I'll refer to it later. My husband was in the 398th Bomb Group, which is part of the 8th Air Force during World War II. And they were stationed in England. And they were the ones that flew the B-17s that bombed Germany. Okay, fast forward about 40 years, and the same fellows were talked about getting together with reunions. Other ones have done that too. So every year they'd have a reunion to get together and talk, you know, what guys talk about. And so in 1986, they thought, why don't we go to England and have a reunion over there? So they decided on that, and they had to let them know because there was over 350 that went over there.
Wow.
But I can tell you the reception we got was unbelievable. Bells and whistles and flags and banners, and people were hugging and kissing people they'd never seen before in their lives. And that pretty much set the tone for the whole week because they were so thankful because they knew, the English people knew without the American fellows they would have lost the war. So anyway, that's that. What we're going to talk about tonight is going to end on March 13th, 1993, but it's going to start long before I was born. Okay? And because my mind and my talking doesn't always go at the same time, and my brain with the whole thing, so then I've got all this. Okay. Unless I'd be like Catherine Kavanaugh, remember her, Catherine Bernard, Mrs. Henry Bernard. Catherine and Henry were really a nice couple. And Catherine had the habit of changing subjects in the middle of a sentence. So when that happened, she pointed at Henry. And his job was to remember where she was and put her back on the tongue. So pay attention because I may be doing the same darn thing. Anyway, I'll start with, my father was born in North Dakota. And he said he couldn't grow up fast enough to get out of North Dakota. He said it was blizzards in the winter and sandstorms in the summer. So when he was graduating from high school, it was in 1920, so he went to Detroit because the automobile industry was having troubles now, but back then they were just getting started. And so he knew he could get a good job there, which he did. My mother was born in New York, and the reason she got to Detroit because her father's company relocated in Detroit, and so they're both there. So they meet, they get married in 1926, and then comes 1929. That was the stock market crashed and everybody was out of work and the whole thing. And my dad lost his job too. So what was he going to do to feed his family? My brother was 2 years old at the time. Well, I guess I'll have to become a farmer. Now he knew nothing about farming. He'd never grown up a farm, but he knew he was smart enough to learn. And at the same time, he had an aunt, at the same time, there was a farmer in Ionia, Michigan, which was over 200 miles from Detroit, that was willing to take him on as a hired man so that he could learn how to farm. So that's where we went to Ionia, and that's where I was born in 1930. So my dad worked for this farmer for about a year and a half, and then he decided, he pretty much figured it out by then. And at that time, he had an aunt that had a farm near Wisconsin Dells, and her husband had died, and she moved back to town. Wisconsin Dells was called Kilburn at the time. It was a different name at that time. And so he asked his aunt if we could come and live on the farm, and he would give her half of whatever he earned. And she said, good. So the farm still had the machinery, and my dad had money enough to buy whatever he needed in the way of livestock or whatever. And so now we're farmers. Now my mother probably hadn't seen a cow until she got to Ionia. So she wasn't one bit interested in the barn or the animals. But she took care of the chickens and the eggs. And she had a big garden that she learned how to cook and can and preserve all the things that she grew. And I know that she churned butter and made ice cream. And she also bottled root beer. And sometimes in the middle of the night when it was really quiet, you could hear one of those caps go. So anyway, she had to learn to sew. she'd lay out the pattern in the middle of the floor and try to decide how it went together. We'd get a notch here and a circle there. It wasn't much in the way of instructions back then. Which made me think about a couple of years ago, I was reading a recipe in the Princeton Herald, and in the recipe, 2 times it said, "Now wash your hands." I mean, you got to roll your eyes, and we down till you say, "Now, wash your hands." Okay. So anyway, we were talking about her sewing. Okay, and she not only learned to sew on the machine, but she learned to sew. You know what this is? With the thermaline, she could go 90 miles an hour with this thing. She tried to teach me how to use it, but no matter which finger I had, it was always in the way. So I never learned to do that.
Is that her thimble?
Yeah, this is her thimble.
Oh,
Well worn. Anyway, she also learned to cut hair. You had to learn everything in there. She didn't know any of that stuff. And she said, we'd cut a little, we'd laugh a little, cut a little, we'd laugh a little more. And I could understand because my mother had a good sense of humor, so that just sounded like her. I don't remember going to school, but I know that I did. But I remember the Saturday night dances. Everybody went to a Saturday night dance. And my parents would sell enough eggs, they needed 25 cents for the ticket to get to the dance. The dance hall was in the Dells, and it was a big, big building. Fancy, hardwood floors, slippery hardwood floors, and it had benches all the way around the outside of it. And they'd have, I don't know, between 12 and 15 pieces of the orchestra, and they always had a pretty girl singer at that time, as I remember. And they had what they were called mixers, and that's when the guys would go to the middle of the floor and form a circle, the women would go to the floor and form a circle, and when the music started, the guys would go one way and the girls would go the other way. And when the music stopped, they'd dance with whoever was in front of them. So it was a really kind of a neat way to meet and to have fun. And of course, between dances, we'd run up and down the floor, skating on those slippery floors. And then by the time the dance was over, most of the kids would be sound asleep on those old hard benches around the outside. And we often had a bum that was up at the house. That's not politically correct now, but that's what they called them back then. And my mother would always fix them a meal. It was 2 things. They had to wash their hands and they had to eat outside, but she never turned anybody down. My younger brother was born in the Dells on Valentine's Day in 1934. And by that time, we'd been on the farm for a while, and everybody was really enjoying living there, and time was really passing quite quickly. As for us kids, we had horses to ride. They were the work variety, and it was, and it was saddles, but it was fun, and we had, puppies and kittens to love, and so, life was good. And about this time, my dad decided he'd really like to strike out on his own. So in 1937, he bought a 160-acre farm between Princeton and Montello. And he soon discovered that all his neighbors talked German. And they were a little bit, leery about these city kids that, thought they could farm. So anyway, when they would get together, the neighbors would talk German to each other, and they'd talk, English to my parents. And that went on for a while, and my mother thought, I think I can fix that. So every Sunday afternoon, she would invite 1 or 2 of the couples over for cards, playing cards, and you'd hear them laughing and having a good time. Probably was a little beer involved there, but probably not much. And at the end, she always would serve a lunch afterward. And this went on for a number of months, and by that time, they were all really good friends, and friends that lasted a lifetime. So anyway. On December 6th, 1991, that was the day before Pearl Harbor, my father received a telegram from the government directing him to report to Rock Island, Illinois, and work in the arsenal. At that time, it was the largest tank arsenal in the world. So my dad had to sell all the livestock and so forth, and he went immediately to Rock Island because it was made very clear that he should go. The four of us followed when school was out in May. When we arrived, we moved into the Arsenal Courts. It was built by the government before the war even started. They were row houses, all red brick, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, small but adequate. And I remember our house number was 451 13th and a half Avenue. And I was 12 years old at the time, and I did a lot of babysitting because the mothers were going to work now to take the place of the guys that were going to war, so it was babies to take care of. One of the first ones that I went, and so when the lady left, she asked me to warm the baby's milk in the bottle warmer. Well, I was just about ready to pour the milk into the bottle warmer when the old brain kicked in. It wasn't a very good idea. Again, 12 years old. There was no babysitting classes back then, I'm telling you. And this same lady didn't know anything about cooking, and she made sandwiches for every single meal, if you can imagine what that was. When I was 14, I was hired by Walgreens. I told them I was 16. They didn't care. You know, help was hard to get. I worked behind the soda fountain making drinks, ice cream specialties, and made-to-order sandwiches. My favorite was when I had the morning shift because they had really large sweet rolls with icing on them, and they put them just on the grill for a little while to warm them, and then cut them in 3 pieces. They were really good. And we all made really good friends down there because everybody was from place else. You know, they all came to the courts, and then they were all going to go back home later anyway, like we did. But we still made good friends, and I had a friend, her name was Donna Townsend, and we were together all the time. We even dressed alike when it was possible. And during the time we were there, we'd come up to the farm 2 or 3 times a year, you know, just to see how things were. So they would let me bring Donna with me because I didn't have a sister. And the only thing was, she was a little prone to car sickness, and she rarely disappointed. When the war ended in 1945, everyone left the courts and we returned to the farm as well. In that fall, I entered Montello High School, and I've got to tell you this too, because you know, I'm never here when they have school. I mean, during the school year, for 34 years, I've not been here. But I had to pick up something at the school in May. So I drove over there. Now I got to find a place to park. I mean, the thing is, the parking lot's full of cars, and you wonder, who rides the buses, right? So I go to the school, I tried to open the door, but it was stuck. It was still stuck, and then I realized it wasn't stuck. It was locked. Pretty soon this voice comes over the intercom and wants to know who I am, what I want, and all the rest. Well, I finally satisfied her, so she buzzed me in. And the first thing I saw when I went in the door was this policeman, fully dressed, full uniform, sitting right there on the right-hand side. And then I walked toward the office, and all I could see was all these people in the office. So now I'm back here, going to Montello High School. If you go to their parking lot, there'll be 1 car, and that will belong to a Metcalf who has to get home and do his chores. Because if you take the late bus, it's an hour and a half. If you take the early bus, it's just like a half an hour. But everybody rode the bus. And as far as getting into school, I could have gone in any door of that school any time of the day or night or whatever. And then as far as employees, I told you the employees I saw there. We had 2 employees at Montello High School. We had the principal and we had the janitor. And the principal taught math. That was the difference. So I just had to throw that out there, how things have changed. Okay, now I'm at Montello High School, where I became friends, made 2 friends, Velda Weckworth and Marion Punky Ebert. And you might know her by Mrs. Cyfrost, okay? That summer, she got a job here in Princeton, working for Art Klutzbaker at his bakery. And she told me that a job was available at Albert Cowell's, and I told you that he had a store that one's torn down now. Albert Cowell had a grocery store, and he was looking for a clerk. And would I be interested in coming to Princeton, working at the store, and then rooming with her? So I said, yeah. why not? So we rented a room on the corner of North Howard and Main Street, just one block from where I would later live for 64 years on Howard Street, on North Howard Street. Now, this was June 18th, 1946, and we were out for a stroll on a warm June evening when this brand new, shining 1946 car drives up. And who's in that car but Morris Swed and Henry Bernard. And they asked us if we wanted to go for a ride. Well, now you see, I'm not only a streetwalker, but now I'm a pickup. No wonder my parents were a little bit nervous. But anyway, Mary Punky had gone with Hank, so yeah, we went for a ride. And actually, Morris and I hit it off right off the bat. And about 2 weeks later, he said, you know, we're going to hire another clerk. Why don't you come and work for us? Well, I don't even know if I gave Mr. Cowell notice or not. But I did, and so now we were together all day and some evenings until school started in the fall. Okay. When the summer ended, I thought the romance ended too, and no need to tell my parents. However, Morris started showing up at the house, and so that was a different story. Since I was dating others, they weren't too concerned, and the school year continued. When May arrived, it was time to look for a job. Not wanting me to come back to Princeton, they suggested Wisconsin Dells because my dad had an aunt that lived there and she'd probably keep an eye on me. I got a job waitressing at Brown's restaurant. Mrs. Brown was very particular about performance and appearance. Our brown and white checked uniforms we had a brown and white checked uniforms, and our aprons and our headpieces were all starched because they didn't have any wash and swear in those days. Everything was cotton and had to be starched, and she wouldn't let us sit down because it would, you know, wreck up for sure. So,
can we pass this around?
Yeah, if you want to. Sure. When I can you talk about a bargain. This was our recipe, first of all.
Your menu?
Right, our menu. Okay. Okay, between $1.75 and there's 4 complete dinners for between $1.70. Along with your dinner, you get either juice or soup, and you get a salad, you get French fries or mashed potatoes, a vegetable, rolls and butter, beverage, and dessert for the $1.25 or whatever. I mean, we're talking a bargain here, girls. But that's when if you got a dime tip, that was pretty good stuff at that time.
What year was that?
This was in 47.
47.
I found a room to rent in a private home and my summer arrived. Let's see, I'm good here. So Morris came every Sunday and he wrote or called often. When September arrived, it was back to Montello for my senior year. By that time, Morris was coming over more often, but we assured everyone it was not serious. I'll explain that one later too. The year went on and I graduated from Montello, and I actually was awarded a 4-year fully paid scholarship to the University of Wisconsin, which would be pretty nice to have today for sure. But anyway, in that time, college was not something that kids talked about at all. It just wasn't on the agenda for anyone. The girls would graduate from high school. Within a year or two, they got married. The guys graduated and they went right to work. You know, it was just one of those things. In fact, of our class with 44 students, one fellow went to college, and the gal that got the salutatorian took her 2 years at Teachers College. You know, that's just the way they did it. Now it was May 1948. I was 17 at the time and too young for a real job. So I was off to the Dells again. Only this time I took my best friend, Belva Wickworth. We both got a job at Brown's restaurant and those starched uniforms. Morris continued to come every Sunday, only this time he would bring his best friend, Henry Bernard, and the 4 of us would double date. Morris and I were getting quite serious at this time, still knowing that marriage was impossible because of our family's opposition. And it was both sides of the family that was opposed. Because not because they didn't love us, it was because they did love us, and they just thought it was not a good match. We had too many things that just were making for a bad marriage, and they didn't want that to happen. First of all, there was a difference in age, there was a difference in religion, there was a difference in upbringing, there was just a lot of things that they thought we couldn't overcome. And rather than see us get married and have a disastrous marriage, they were against it. It had nothing to do, wonderful people who couldn't love us, so it wasn't that at all. But their heart was in the right place, and we knew that. It is now September, and Belva and I moved to Milwaukee, rented a room in a private home for $7 a week, and started looking for work. I needed to be 18 for my office job, so I did what I knew, waitressing at a hotel in downtown Milwaukee. I got the dreaded 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. I remember those dark bus rides to work and squeezing all kinds of oranges for breakfast. So when I turned 18, I found work processing small claims at American Mutual Liability Insurance Company in downtown Milwaukee, not far from where the hotel was. Meanwhile, back in Princeton, Morris's dad had become aware of our romance and decided it was becoming too serious. His answer was to send Morris to Chicago to find a Jewish girl. They were kind of rare around here, you understand. With a promise that they were all alike as long as they were Jewish. Okay. Morris was able to find a job easily with his banking education and experience in downtown Chicago. He was there for a year and hated living there. And I was living in Milwaukee, and he would drive up to see me every weekend. And this went on for months. One day the phone rang, and he said, "Will you marry me?" How romantic, right? I just wondered whether he was on his knee when he was on the phone. I never did ask him that. So, anyway, that was the easy part, because I said yes. Now the hard part was telling our parents. But as far as I was concerned, by that time, I think my parents were pretty much okay with it. I mean, because they loved Morris, but he just wasn't right for me as far as they were concerned. But maybe they know more than we know. So they kind of said, we can't beat him, let's join him, and that's kind of how it was. As far as Mr. Swed, he decided that since the plan for Morris in Chicago had failed, he might just as well return to Princeton and help manage the store. That was wonderful news for all of us. Then we made wedding plans, okay? Now we got to choose a date. So we chose November 20th, never realizing that that's right in the middle of deer hunting season. So we could never have a party on our anniversary because nobody would come. But we had a very nice wedding. All of Morris's family was there, my family was there. Belva was my maid of honor, and Henry was there for Morris, and we had a few friends. And so it all went very well. We had dinner together afterward, and we had To Each His Own playing in the background. I'm not sure how many know the song To Each His Own. It's beautiful, and it's a song that we danced to all the time we went together, so we had that. Okay. When we prepared to leave, it had begun to rain. This is in November, the end of November, which soon turned to sleet and then to snow. To make matters worse, my brother had filled our hubcaps with pebbles, making an annoying rattle. By the time we stopped to remove them, we were in a full-blown snowstorm. We had driven about an hour into Illinois when we slid off the road and into the ditch. And for nearly an hour we waited, and a snowplow came along and pulled us out. But at least we were heading south, at least in the right direction. The next morning we were on our way and soon drove out of bad weather. All was good until we got to Birmingham, Alabama. We had planned to stay there on the second night of our trip when an Army truck decided for us when it ran into the side of our car. Actually, it wasn't even our car. Morris's dad had suggested we use his car, the 1942 Oldsmobile. It was a big car, comfortable car. I think wouldn't go less than 80 miles an hour, though I found that out right away. But anyway, after no one was hurt in the accident, which is a good thing, but it was considerable damage to the car. And the police came and all the paperwork that goes with it, you know how that is. And the soldier was driving the truck, assured us that the government would pay us for our expenses, and we're still waiting on that one. Then it was off to the garage, and by that time, I was pretty upset. Actually, I was a mess. And I gave him the sob story. I mean, it's our honeymoon, we got reservations, and blah, blah, blah. And this kind guy took pity, I think, and he said, don't worry. He said, we'll have your car ready for you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning if we have to work all night. And I don't know what they did, but it was ready at 8 o'clock the next morning. The next stop was Miami Beach in the Martinique Hotel. Because we had decided, if we're going to do this one time, we're going to do it up. Because this was a 5-star hotel right on the ocean. But the thing of it was, we drive there in our 1942 Oldsmobile, and all we see are these BMWs, these Cadillacs, these Mercedes. Oh my God, maybe we're out of our league. You know. But everybody was really very nice, and when they knew that we were on our honeymoon, it was even better. Okay. After living like millionaires were wealthy back then, unlike today. And it was time to return to the real world. Our trip back was uneventful. When we got to Madison, I told Morris he'd have to stop. I needed a cookbook. He hadn't asked, and I certainly hadn't offered. So now I'm looking at cookbooks, and I have no clue about a cookbook. My mom didn't have a cookbook. She did everything in her little tablets. And so I decided, well, that's the biggest one I could find. And this is the Culinary Arts Institute Encyclopedia Cookbook by Ruth Reidenheimer.
Wow.
It's been on my counter every move I've ever made, which wasn't very many, but I've had it anyway. And we arrived back in Princeton a couple of hours later. The clerks greeted us at the store, and we went upstairs, which was be my home for the next 11 months. Now, Morris said that's his only home he ever had, except when he was in college and in the Army, because everybody lived about their businesses back then. If you had a business, you lived it, so the Sweds did too. And it was, it's being made into that hotel now, so that's the building. It was a huge apartment, and we only had half of it. Half of it was storage, and half was where we lived, and we still had 8 big rooms, 60-foot ceilings, hardwood floors throughout, a kerosene stove for cooking, no washer or dryer, because Mrs. McCormick did that. That was Scotty's mother. She was all of 5 foot tall, and she had done the cleaning, but I thought I could manage that somehow. But it was the cooking. Morris's dad made his own breakfast, and 7 days a week he had his noon meal at Mrs. Berry's lodge. That got, where that is still there, but of course Mrs. Berry's been gone for a long time. Now, as far as so the only thing I had to do was make supper for 3 of us. Then we had a grocery store, so I had plenty of groceries, but we didn't have fresh meat. But Mr. Art Lidke was just down the street there a little while. So what would happen, I'd go down in the morning, he'd sell me a piece of meat, and he'd tell me how to fix it. And the rest I could, find in there. So that worked out pretty good, because one time he sold me a leg of lamb, and I should have known better than that. Anyway, after a week when returning from our honeymoon, our parents informed us that their neighbors in the Pines in McCann, that's where they lived out there between Princeton and Montello, were planning to chivalry us. If you know what a chivalry is, they're following Saturday night. So we made arrangements with the owners of Pie Alley to have their the chivalry out there. Pie Alley was a large building with a bar across the whole front, and a large kitchen and 2 dance halls in the back. It was located on the large triangle of Highway 73 between Princeton and Green Lake. We were at my parents' home on that Saturday when about 8 o'clock the racket started, they started banging pots and pans and shooting guns into the air. So until we came out and told them that the party would be at Bel Air. It was a tradition at that time that, you know, we paid for all the food and drink for the whole party, and we did that. And when the party went well, we left probably about midnight. But anyway, the next morning, the first person in the store said, "Oh, you must have had a hot party up there the last time." She said, "Pie Alley burned to the ground."
Oh.
That was our chivalry. We felt terrible because not only did we lose everything, but the precious dog was killed in it too. So that was really sad. And the story goes that Paul Stelter's cigar got kicked under one of the benches, and it probably caused the fire. Who knows? Nobody knew what happened. The winter, the winter ended. We were thinking plans of building a home of our own. We purchased 1.5 lots of undeveloped land there on North Howard Street because it was undeveloped at that time. We would be the first of 8 new homes on that block. At the time we were building, there were 14 other homes being built in the city, all men coming back from the war. Since there were only 3 builders, 3 or 4 plumbers, and about the same amount of electricians available, you can imagine how in demand they were. And sometimes it depended on how much beer you gave them when they show up at your house the next day. Anyway, we were the first house in town to build a double garage. Because before the war, all your garages were freestanding. The plans for after the war, there was attached garage, but only one because nobody had 2 cars in those years. But my father-in-law, of course, had a car, so we made a 2-car garage so that he could keep his car there. Afterward, Ruffles on one side, they added a garage. Biaseki's on the other side, they added a garage, and there was other garages that were added. But we had the very first one in Princeton. We moved in on our first wedding anniversary, November 20th, 1950. We had purchased all new furniture, and most of it was delivered by that date. It was wonderful having our own home now. Spoiled only by the severe bouts of morning sickness. Yes, we were expecting a child. I ate a lot of dry crackers that winter and was looking forward to feeling well again. I had gained only 18 pounds, anticipating a small baby. That would not be the case. Connie arrived on June 4th, 1951 at Ripon Hospital weighing nearly 9 pounds. Wow. When the normal hospital stay of 1 week ended, now what do they get? A half, maybe overnight or something, but it was everybody got. You can get out of bed on things about the 4th day. I mean, it was different. But when the week ended, I was not able to leave, but my baby was and was discharged into Morris's care. I would remain another 2 weeks. Our home was ready to welcome a baby, but Morris had 0 experience. My mother, who was still on the farm, offered to come and help, but Morris was determined to do it all. He got excellent advice from Alice Tyler, a good friend, and also the doctor's wife, my doctor's wife. She showed him how to make formula. Everything had to be sterilized in those days. How to bathe and diaper a baby and so forth. Pampers were a long way, years away. He was on duty 24 hours a day, so Howard and Auntie at the store had to put in extra hours because Morris was home all the time. But he'd come visit me every afternoon, and he'd leave the baby with either Alice Tyler or Liz Buchan. They lived right across the street. One day he showed up on crutches and playing baseball, and so he was still playing Mr. Mom at home. Then when I got there, it was time to show me all his expertise, and he was rather proud of himself, I must say. The only help I needed was nap time when someone had to lift the baby in and out of the crib. We had wonderful neighbors who were anxious to help. Nobody's left so far, have they?
No.
No.
On the edge of our seats.
Fast forward 2 years. I was expecting our second child. It was a nice July afternoon in time for my 8-month checkup. Connie and I decided to walk a few blocks downtown to my doctor's office. At that time, Dr. Tyler shared office space and waiting room with my dentist, Dr. Sam Farrow. I don't know how many people know that. Remember that? I was waiting to be called when Connie asked for a book. When I got up to get the book, I realized it was time to leave. So they called Morris, and a few hours later, my son was born on July 14th, 1953. But he was barely 6 pounds, so that was much easier. And I was discharged a week later. Only problem was when I left, they said, you gotta feed that kid every 2 hours around the clock. Well, all he wanted to do was sleep, and it would take almost an hour to get 1 ounce down. And then 2 hours later, we had to start over again. And he just wanted to sleep, that's all there was, but we had to just fight with him to get him to drink anything. Okay. Got into the second week, I was feeding him in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden I heard this crash. And then I realized I had fallen asleep, and the bottle hit the floor, and it was hardwood floor, so in a glass bottle, so it made quite a noise. So I just picked him up and put him in the crib, and I thought, you know, he dies, he dies. I gotta get some sleep. But he lived, and I had a good night's sleep. Living on North Howard Street was like living in a Norman Rockwell setting, and I mean that sincerely. I loved it there. It was a new neighborhood, new homes, young couples with children were born there, and they stayed through high school. That's what it was in a small town. Connie and Steve grew up in these surroundings with plenty of playmates. There was 26 baby boomers in that block where we lived on Howard Street there. And the kids were respectful and mannerly. If one misbehaved and were sent home with their mother's blessing. I remember all the birthday parties. Everybody had a birthday party, forever it seemed like. There was just no end to the parties. But grown-ups had parties too. There were 2 groups in town. Actually, there might have been 3 groups, but if there was, they didn't invite me. But there was the 400s and the 500s. Now the 500s were a little bit older. I mean, they were the Heastons and the Yars and the Breezes and so forth. The 400s, that was the Sweds and the Belkys and the Kriegers and Zudros, Wuckelses. Well, actually half of the Lions Club, if you want to be honest. And we had our parties too. At that time, cocktail parties were real popular. And to have a party, all you needed was a table with snacks and some fancy hors d'oeuvres and 2 pitchers. You needed a pitcher of brandy Manhattans and a pitcher of bourbon Manhattans, and you had a party. And you dressed up. I mean, we wore dresses and high heels. The guys wore suit and tie. And we used our good stuff. I mean, everybody had good stuff. I still have good stuff. Nobody wants my good stuff. Anyway, that was, and Morris thought, you know, we don't want to have cocktail parties. He said, we'll have dinner parties. Yeah. So what I did, every April, every Saturday in April, and I did this for years, I could seat 14 to 16 at my table. And so we'd have dinner parties. And what I do is have a menu, and I'd have the same menu every single week. Because it was so easy, I knew how much to buy, I knew how to fix it, it had the same dishes, the whole thing. And it didn't matter because every Saturday night it was a different group of people, so it didn't matter if it was the same food. Of course, the leftovers got a little boring, I must tell you. And then in the summer, I'd have one big party, usually in July, where the whole bunch was invited, and we'd have it in the backyard with picnic tables and umbrellas, and that was easier because there was, you know, paper and plastic at that time. By the early 60s, my parents had retired to Florida, and Morris and I would spend a week with them every January. We enjoyed the warm weather and decided that would be our choice when the time came. That time came in September 1989, having been in business in Princeton for nearly 80 years. We sold the store and bought a home in Gulf Lakes in Bradenton, Florida, just a few blocks from my parents. That worked just fine for them and for us. We were there in time to plan their 65th wedding anniversary, and they actually made 67. For the anniversary, they had relatives that came from all over the United States, and it was beautiful. Lots of memories. We had kept our home in Princeton, spending 6 months in each place. Now, with extra time on our hands, we were asked to be chairman of the 398th Bomb Group reunion. That's the one I told you about that had gone to England and so forth. Scheduled for Oshkosh in the fall of 1990. We had been attending all of these reunions ever since it was organized in Rapid City in 1984. About 60 had attended that first meeting, and the numbers grew, and the size of the hosting cities had grew too. Oshkosh was selected mainly because of the EAA and the B-17. The 390th paid to have the B-17 were restored, I guess it would be, they were restored and colored, painted with their color and their insignia. So this was a big deal to come and see the B-17, and I'm sure it's right there in the hangar at Oshkosh. And we were selected to be chairman, and we wondered how we could manage, but managed we did. There was 531 airmen and their wives, and we took care of them for 4 days. They came from every state, and 3 couples arrived from England. It took several months of planning and managing, but Morris and I did it all without professional help too, and by all means, I guess, did it well. Anyway, see, we're down to 90, I'm only going to 93, so you're not, it's going to last much longer. Now it's January 1993. Morris and I and a group from Gulf Lakes were planning a trip to Panama, and I really wanted to go. Well, about a week before we were to leave, I knew I had a problem. You remember back in 1951 when I spent that extra 2 weeks in the hospital? Well, that was because my back was injured. And after the following 42 years, sometime, 1 or 2 times every year, I would have a problem. And it was never very pleasant either. So I knew when this was coming that it would never be well enough, but before the trip would go, my back would still be bad. So the only thing the doctors, they tried everything and nothing really worked. But the only thing I hadn't tried was a chiropractor, because the doctors, discouraged that. But I am desperate now. So I thought, what else I can try? So I did. I went to a chiropractor, and I went every day till the time we left. The day they left, I was worse than ever. The bad news is, I didn't get to take the trip. But the good news is, I've been 30 years pain-free. Wow, that's what it was. Okay. Now, it's 2 months later, March 13th, 1993. The worst day of my life, certainly the scariest day of my life, and what I thought was going to be the last day of my life. I was in a storm that lasted 2.5 days, almost all of it in total darkness. You can look it up under Google. It was called the storm of the century, and I can't even begin to tell you what that was. Anyway,
Where were you?
I don't know. It started in Florida. I lived by the Gulf. It started in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
Went all the way up through New York and out to the north of well, I can show you. The storm formed in the Gulf of Mexico and unleashed its wrath for 2.5 days as it made its way across 26 states, eventually dissipating in the North Atlantic on March 15th. And it dropped 56 inches of snow, had winds of 144 miles an hour, spawned tornadoes, much in total darkness. People were stranded in airports, schools, office buildings for 2 days, and hundreds would die. So in my area, where I was talking, in our area there was a tidal surge that swamped houses, smashed cars, scooped up furniture, boats, and everything in its path. The strong winds had accomplished, the storms that accompanied the storm did its damage to what they called a white hurricane. The strong winds blew salt and sand out of the Gulf, that when the storm was over where I lived, everything was pure white. The trees, the flowers, everything was pure white. From the salt and sand, and it just stopped. It was hit with such force that it was just like it was glued on there. So after the storm was over, everybody got their clothes out and tried to get all that off of there, but a lot of it was too late. It killed the plants and so forth. So that was the one. I wasn't going to read you that, but that was the storm of the century, and it was the most scary. You can't imagine what it was, and almost all of it in total darkness. The sound of that storm. Talk about a freight train. It was worse than that. And well, anyway, but I survived it. And as you can see, I did survive the storm. And here I am, 30 years later, talking to the Historical Society for the 4th time. That's it, folks. Woo!
Did you take some questions, maybe?
What would you possibly want to know?
Well, I've got a question, but I want to let these people ask questions first. Does anyone have a question for Mary? First of all, thank you very much. That was amazing.
Now, I've never timed it. How long did that take?
2.5 hours.
Oh, much longer than that.
About 45 minutes.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good.
Fantastic.
All right. Anybody have a question for Mary? Like to ask her?
I don't have a question. I just have a statement. Mary, you did great.
Yeah.
Like I didn't offer volunteer for this group, so. Anyway, and yours?
Here's my question. So first of all, show of hands, how many people in this shopped at the Swed's store, actually shopped in the store? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 or 10 people?
That's a whole different story too.
I want to hear about it. So
No,
here's
not tonight, not tonight.
So
No,
Matt Trotter owns the store now.
Yeah.
Owns that building now.
Right.
He's turning it into a hotel.
correct.
I personally invited him to come here, and he really wanted to be here, but he couldn't. So he
Okay.
wanted to know, did we video it? So he would like to watch it. But here's my question. For those of us who didn't ever step foot in Swed's store, would you, I know it probably had a lot of different layouts, but pick one you remember. Would you like walk in the store and just help me identify like where was all the stuff when you went, like when you came in, what was the first
Well,
thing you
there
saw?
was two alleys or two
Aisles?
refrigeration on one side, the other one was all the canned goods, and then the other one was all,
Cookies.
well, like overalls and clothes and that kind of thing.
Dry
Yeah.
goods.
And it changed a lot from the time we were married, well, I'm talking about when I was first here.
Yeah.
Because most of our customers were farmers at that time. So our grocery department was only a small part of the store. Because what do they farmers need? All they need is baking powder and some
Flour.
salt and you know, they don't need fruit and vegetables and eggs and chicken and wheat, you know. So that was very, but then as years went on and the grocery department got to be all half of the store, but at the beginning it was just at the back of the store. And I don't know if anybody in the world sold more Oshkosh by Oshkosh stuff than we had, but I mean, we piles of it. You can't imagine how many products that Oshkosh made that we sold. You know.
Or windmill cookies.
Yeah.
I got my.
And I remember hearing stories about how a certain night of the week, the men would come downtown and they would maybe go to the bars, but the women and the kids would show up, and then you had to put your babysitting skills to test. But can you tell us about
Well, I
what
can
that-
just tell you that, first of all, Mr. Swed, of course, came from Russia. And when he came here, he couldn't speak English at all. He could speak 5 languages, but English wasn't one of them. So he came to Princeton, and there was five departments, 5 general stores here. And it didn't bother him at all. I mean, he thought, he felt, you know, competition is good. So he came here. And what were his chances? He was Jewish. He came into a community that was quite religious, Catholic and Lutheran. But he had a few things going for him in a way. First of all, he talked German and 2 of his languages are German and Polish. So when the people, and these were mostly farmers, because in those days, Princeton was where you went. You didn't go anyplace else because some of it was like on horse and buggy and the whole thing. So you came to Princeton, that was it. But anyway, what was I at here now? I'm going to go like this here.
The languages.
Oh, the language, yes. So when they come in the store and he could talk to them in their own language, now the other people couldn't. That meant a lot to those people. It really did. That he could talk to them into their own language. And he also had a box of tobacco, and they could fill their pipes free with that tobacco. You know, not right. And also, the stores were open on Wednesdays and Saturday nights. And so the men, they all come in from the country. Where would the guys go? Right to the tavern, and so the women would do the shopping. Well, somehow the women got through shopping before the men got through at the tavern. So they could come into our store, and he had chairs for them to sit. And when the chairs were full, we had a log table where he measured the yard goods. And so when the chairs were full, they could sit on there. And sometimes the guys didn't come from the tavern until 11 o'clock at night. The other stores closed at 9. Well, we stayed open until the last guy came in. So all those things made up. Again, he was extremely nice and extremely honest. In fact, he charged people because a lot of times they had to sell something before they'd have the money to pay. So he just put it on the spindle. he never sent out a bill in his life, because he figured if they charge and they plan to pay me, they'll be my customer. If they charge and they have no intention of paying me, they aren't coming back anyway, so I haven't lost anything. So he never sent out a bill ever, so. And other things, you know. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Yes?
I got a question. I've heard a lot about Morris and his father Morris. What about Morris's mother? Where was she?
Okay, his mother died when Morris was in England, which was very sad. And so he didn't even, in fact, the first he got, he was getting all these letters.
When he was
Why
in the
all of a
war?
sudden-
When he was in the war?
In the war, right.
Okay.
And so he was in, so he didn't even, you know, get back or anything like that. He was in the, yeah, it was right in the middle of the war. So, yes.
I think way back when I was just a youngster, there was some barter that went on too. Where the farmers would bring their eggs in.
Oh, yeah, a lot of that. Oh,
And I
sure.
think that one, now I don't remember at least our family bringing butter in,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that was some of that too.
Oh, a lot of that going on, yes. It wasn't always just money. Yeah, you was
The
trading
farmers
what you
didn't
had
need
for
it,
what
but
I
it was
had. and so
available
forth.
to the
Yeah.
people from
Yeah,
towns.
yeah. And you didn't worry about the last penny. I mean, it was just, you know, you trade this for that, and that's how it worked, yeah. Well, yeah, and like I said, I really enjoy living in Princeton, and I really enjoy living on Howard Street. And you know, Liz Buchan lived right across the street from me. She lived to be 98. Isabel Piasecki lived right next to me. She lived to be 98. So I had to get the heck out of there because, you know, they expect me to live to be 98 if I was on that street, so.
You're close.
Yeah, close, yeah. So anyway, that's the deal.
Well, before you leave,
Yeah, I
so
gotta sign
last
that.
year, the community hall, their commemorative ornament was Swed's grocery store. And I've been bugging
Yeah.
Mary ever since that. I'm like, one of these days, I'm gonna bring this ornament in and you're gonna sign the back of it for me.
You know how hard that is to sign?
No,
I mean,
we're
that's.
gonna find out together.
It doesn't look like it, because I've tried,
Well,
you can't really.
no one's gonna grade your penmanship, but would you do me the honor?
I would
Mary,
be
you-
very happy to do that.
So much sign.
Now, you want to, okay,
However you wanna do it.
okay. So I have to have a little ink here.
All right? Let's see if I can get it primed for you.
Okay.
Hopefully this works.
No, that's not too bad. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
You're
Mary.
welcome.
All right, how about a nice round of applause?
I picture back at my.
Okay, we have one more guest speaker lined up for this year. I believe Will Gore is for the October meeting. So we're all looking forward to that. The meeting in November, we don't have a speaker plan. What we're gonna do is we've had so much activity this year between all the different things we were involved with and what's going on back there that we are gonna put together a nice slideshow and just kind of do a year in review of the Princeton Historical Society for our November meeting. And then we are planning a December, you know, we always have a kind of a December final meeting, get together at a restaurant. Not sure where it's gonna be, it might be McCann River this year, where Vicky's in charge of that, so, all right. Anything else before we adjourn? Anybody have anything else they want to say? All right, thank you very much for coming, we'll see you in October.